In 940 CE, a severed head flew across Japan, and that was just the beginning of the nightmare. Picture this: you're a Japanese peasant in medieval Kyoto, walking through the public market when you see something that makes your blood freeze. A decomposing head sits on a spike, its eyes still blazing with supernatural fury, refusing to rot like any normal corpse should. But here's the twist that will haunt Japan for over 1,000 years. This rebel samurai's daughter is about to make her father's vengeful spirit look like a gentle breeze compared to the bone-crushing hurricane of revenge she's preparing to unleash. This isn't just another ghost story. This is the legend of Princess Takiyasha-hime, a woman who supposedly traded her humanity for the power to command an army of the dead. And the monster she summoned? It would become one of Japan's most feared supernatural creatures, immortalized in art that still sends chills down spines today. What happens when a daughter's love collides with the darkest magic imaginable? You're about to find out. To understand the apocalyptic rage that would drive a princess to sorcery, you need to witness the brutal destruction of everything she held dear. Her father wasn't just any samurai. Taira no Masakado was a legend in the making, a warrior whose ambition would shake the foundations of imperial Japan and earn him the title of the nation's first great rebel. The year was 935, and Japan was a powder keg ready to explode. While the emperor sat on his throne in Kyoto, surrounded by the scheming Fujiwara clan who pulled the real strings of power, the eastern provinces were bleeding. Provincial governors, appointed by these same court elites, were nothing more than glorified tax collectors, squeezing peasants until they had nothing left to give. But Masakado was different. Born into the prestigious Taira clan and descended from Emperor Kamu himself, he possessed both imperial blood and the warrior's heart that the soft court nobles had forgotten. Standing tall in the Kanto region, far from the perfumed corridors of the capital, he watched his people suffer under impossible taxation and corrupt officials who cared nothing for the lives they destroyed. What started as family disputes over land rights quickly escalated into something far more dangerous. Masakado's charisma was magnetic. Peasants flocked to his banner, local warriors abandoned their allegiances to join his cause, and soon an entire region was ready to follow him into rebellion against the imperial government. Here's where Masakado made the decision that would doom his family. He didn't just rebel against corrupt officials, he declared himself Shino, the new emperor of Japan. In 939, with his forces controlling the entire Kanto region, he established his own court, appointed his own governors, and directly challenged the divine authority of the imperial throne. The response from Kyoto was swift and merciless. What had been dismissed as minor provincial squabbles suddenly became the greatest threat to imperial authority in Japanese history. The emperor placed an enormous bounty on Masakado's head and warriors across Japan, including his own cousin, Taira no Satomori, answered the call. The final battle came in 940. Masakado, despite his supernatural reputation among his followers, was still mortal. Outnumbered 10-1, his rebellion was crushed in a single devastating defeat. But his death wasn't just an execution. It was a deliberate humiliation designed to destroy his legend forever. His head was severed and sent to Kyoto like a trophy, displayed in the public market as a warning to any other would-be rebels. The imperial court denied him proper burial rites, condemning his spirit to wander as an onryo, a vengeful ghost. They thought they were making an example. Instead, they were creating Japan's most dangerous supernatural entity. But here's what they didn't anticipate. Masakado had a daughter, and she had inherited more than just his royal blood. When the purges began, most of Masakado's family was hunted down and executed. But his daughter, known in later stories as Princess Takiyasha, escaped into the shadows with her brother, carrying nothing but her grief and a burning hatred that would consume her soul. What happens next blurs the line between history and horror. The records go quiet, but the legends that emerged paint a picture of a young woman's descent into supernatural darkness that's more terrifying than any modern horror story. According to these tales, Takiyasha traveled to the Kifune Shrine in Kyoto, a place where the spiritual world and our own intersect at their most dangerous points. This wasn't a casual visit. She had come to perform one of the most feared rituals in Japanese mysticism, the Ushi no Koku Mari, the shrine visit at the hour of the ox. Picture this. For 21 consecutive nights, between 1 and 3 a.m. when the boundary between worlds is thinnest, she performed this curse ritual. Alone in the darkness, surrounded by the hostile energy of a shrine whose peaceful facade hid something far more dangerous. She called upon forces that most sane people wouldn't dare to acknowledge. The Ushi no Koku Mary wasn't just prayer. It was a direct challenge to the gods themselves, a demand for power that could only be granted by the most wrathful divine spirits. Each night, she grew weaker but more determined, her humanity slowly burning away like fuel to feed her growing supernatural abilities. On the 21st night, something answered. The shrine's Eremidima, its violent, destructive spirit, materialized before her. In that moment, Takiyasha ceased to be merely human. The spirit granted her mastery over Onmyoto, the ancient art of Japanese sorcery, and with it came a new identity, Takiyasha-hime, the waterfall demon princess. But power always comes with a price, and hers was steep. The girl who had entered the shrine was gone forever, replaced by something that existed in the space between life and death, human and demon, love and hatred. Armed with her newfound abilities, Takiyasha-hime returned to the ruins of her father's fortress at Soma Castle. The once mighty stronghold was now a haunted wreck, its halls echoing with the voices of the dead. But it was perfect for her purposes, a place where the veil between worlds had already been torn by violence and tragedy. She wasn't alone in those ruins. The legends say she was surrounded by the spirits of her father's army, warriors who had died believing in his cause and now existed in a state of perpetual fury at their defeat. Their rage became her raw material, their unfulfilled vengeance the foundation of her growing power. As word spread that something unnatural had taken residence in the abandoned castle, those same court nobles who had celebrated Masakado's death began to feel the first cold touches of genuine fear. The imperial court couldn't ignore the reports forever. Strange lights in the abandoned fortress, missing travelers on nearby roads, and whispers of unnatural creatures gathering in the ruins forced them to act. They sent a warrior named Oya no Taro Mitsukuni to investigate, though it's important to note that Mitsukuni, like many details of this story, exists more in theatrical legend than historical fact. When Mitsukuni arrived at Soma Castle, he found what appeared to be a beautiful woman claiming to be a courtesan who had taken shelter in the ruins. This was Takiyasha-hime in disguise, but her transformation into something beyond human had left traces that couldn't be completely hidden. Her eyes held depths that spoke of terrible knowledge, and her smile carried the cold edge of someone who had looked death in the face and made a bargain with it. Mitsukuni, experienced in both warfare and the supernatural arts, wasn't easily fooled. He tested her by speaking dismissively of her father, Taira no Masakado, calling him a traitor and a fool who deserved his gruesome fate. The reaction was immediate and terrifying. The beautiful courtesan's mask slipped, revealing the burning hatred underneath. In that moment, Mitsukuni knew exactly who he was facing, and he realized the magnitude of the threat that had been growing in these cursed ruins. That night, as Mitsukuni prepared for what he knew would be a supernatural battle, Takiyasha-hime made her move. This is the moment immortalized in one of Japan's most famous and terrifying artworks, Utagawa Kuniyashi's 1844 woodblock print that captures the full horror of what she unleashed. Standing on the fortress balcony with an ancient scroll in her hands, Takiyasha-hime began to chant in the language of the dead. The air itself seemed to thicken and darken as she read from forbidden texts that should never have been written. The shadows twisted and merged, reality bending around her words as she called upon the collective rage of every warrior who had died following her father's dream. What emerged from that supernatural summoning was a creature of pure nightmare, a Gashadokuro, a starving skeleton of impossible size and malevolent intelligence. Imagine a skeleton 15 times the height of a man, its bones gleaming with an unholy light as they rattled with the sound gachi-gachi that could be heard for miles. This wasn't just a monster. It was the concentrated essence of an entire army's death and rage, their bones fused into a singular engine of destruction. Its empty eye sockets blazed with the fury of thousands of unquiet spirits, and its massive hands could crush buildings like twigs. The Gashadokuro smashed through the palace's tattered screens like they were made of paper, its skeletal fingers reaching for Mitsukuni with the promise of a death more horrible than anything the living could imagine. This was revenge given form, hatred made manifest in bone and supernatural fire. Facing a creature that towered above the castle itself, most warriors would have fled or been crushed to dust in their terror. But Mitsukuni had come prepared for supernatural warfare, and he understood something crucial about the monster before him. For all its terrifying power, The Gashadokuro was held together by pure malice and unresolved hatred. The battle that followed wasn't one of swords and armor, but of will and mystical knowledge. In various versions of the legend, Mitsukuni's victory comes through different means. Sometimes he uses Buddhist sutras to purify the vengeful spirits. Other times he employs Shinto charms to break the binding spell. And in some tales he must solve a riddle or overcome a spiritual trial. But the core truth remains the same. The Gashadokuro, despite being virtually indestructible through physical means, had a fatal weakness. It existed only as long as the hatred that created it remained pure and focused. The moment that vengeful energy was disrupted, purified, or redirected, the massive creature would collapse. In Kuniyashi's famous print, we see the moment of ultimate confrontation, not just between Mitsukuni and the monster, but between the forces of order and the chaos of unchecked vengeance. The Gashadokuro's defeat represents more than just the triumph of one warrior. It symbolizes the ultimate futility of revenge that consumes everything in its path. When the spell was finally broken, the massive skeleton collapsed into a mountain of bones that would take days to clear away. Takiyasha-hime, drained of the supernatural power that had sustained her, was defeated. Her rebellion, like her father's, ended in failure, but unlike his quick death in battle, her defeat carried the weight of having sacrificed her very humanity for nothing. The story of Takiyasha-hime could have ended there, just another failed rebellion consigned to history's footnotes. But something extraordinary happened. Her legend grew stronger in death than it had ever been in life. The tale became a favorite subject for kabuki theater, where audiences thrilled to see the beautiful princess transform into a terrifying sorceress commanding her bone demon. Artists like Kuniyashi created works that are still studied and admired today, capturing the supernatural horror of the Gashadokuro in images that leap off the page with visceral impact. But the most fascinating part of this legacy isn't the princess, it's what happened to her father's spirit. Remember that severed head displayed in Kyoto's market? The legends say it refused to decompose for months, its eyes growing fiercer each day until finally, impossibly, it took flight and flew back toward the Kanto region where Masakado had lived and fought. His onryo became so feared that the authorities eventually did something unprecedented. They deified him. Taira no Masakado, the rebel who had challenged the emperor himself, was transformed into a protective god to appease his wrath. Today, the Masakado Kubizuka shrine in Tokyo marks the spot where his head supposedly landed, sitting on some of the most expensive real estate in modern Japan. Even in death, construction projects near the shrine have been plagued by mysterious accidents, and many Japanese companies still pay their respects to avoid Masakado's curse. The rebel samurai's daughter may have failed in her quest for revenge, but her father's spirit won a victory that lasted over 1,000 years. The legend of Princess Takiyasha-hime asks us a question that echoes through every culture and every age. What happens when love is twisted into hatred? When grief becomes obsession? When the desire for justice transforms into the hunger for revenge? Her story isn't really about magic or monsters. It's about the terrible price of letting our pain consume us completely. Takiyasha-hime traded everything human about herself for the power to strike back at those who had wronged her family. She gained the ability to summon creatures of nightmare, but lost her soul in the process. In many ways, she succeeded beyond her wildest dreams. Her father became a god, her story became immortal, and her Gashadokuro became one of Japan's most feared supernatural creatures, influencing horror stories right up to the present day. But the victory was hollow because the woman who achieved it no longer existed to appreciate it. Perhaps that's the most frightening aspect of her legend. Not the giant skeleton or the supernatural sorcery, but the reminder that sometimes the monster isn't what we summon from the darkness. Sometimes, the monster is what we become when we stare too long into that darkness and let it stare back. The next time you see Kuniyashi's famous print of the Gashadokuro bursting through the palace screens, remember, you're not just looking at a monster. You're looking at what happens when a daughter's love is transformed into something that can shake the foundations of heaven and earth. And in the shadows of modern Tokyo, where Masakado's shrine still stands, that ancient lesson continues to whisper its warning to anyone willing to listen. What would you sacrifice for revenge? And more importantly, would anything be left of you to enjoy it?